Ever catch yourself like, why did I just do that? You know there's a better way, but you went with the shortcut anyway.
We've all been there.
Well, get ready to unpack those mental shortcuts because today's deep dive is all about the hidden biases driving those decisions, often without us even knowing. We're tackling Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, and let me tell you, this book's a masterpiece when it comes to uncovering the quirks in human judgment.
It's one thing to just get it intellectually, but what we really want is to equip you, the listener, to use these insights, become a sharper thinker, and honestly, just make better decisions in a world that's always trying to nudge us one way or another.
Right, cut through the noise. So Kahneman kicks things off with this idea that our brains don't just think one way. He lays out these two systems. System one, that's our fast, instinctual, go-with-the-gut mode.
And then there's system two, the slower, more deliberate, let's think this through side.
Exactly. And the fascinating part is how they're constantly at play, sometimes in sync, sometimes while battling it out for control.
And getting that interplay is key to recognizing our own biases. Because system one, for all its brilliance in everyday life, it's prone to taking shortcuts.
Our brains like efficiency, even if it means sacrificing a bit of accuracy sometimes.
Exactly. And these shortcuts, what Kahneman calls heuristics, they're all about conserving mental energy. Often, they work great. Problem is, they can also lead us astray.
It's like those too good to be true deals. Sometimes they are, but often.
There's a catch.
And speaking of catches, one of the most mind-blowing examples for me was this anchoring effect. Kahneman talks about this study where people spun a wheel of fortune, total randomness, right? But then had to guess the percentage of African nations in the UN.
I'm seeing where you're going with this.
Their guesses were totally skewed by that random number they spun.
It's wild, isn't it? Just being exposed to a number, even if it makes no sense in the context, it can anchor our judgment. And think about how often we're bombarded with numbers, prices, stats, even just the time. These anchors, they're everywhere, subtly shaping how we see things without us realizing it.
So how do we break free? Knowing about them's one thing, but outsmarting our own brains seems way harder.
That's where system two, that critical thinking muscle, comes in. One counterintuitive tactic Kahneman suggests is to think the opposite on purpose. Say you're haggling over a price, and the other person throws out a number that seems crazy high.
Instead of countering with a lower number,
Instead of just meeting them in the middle, you force yourself to come up with reasons why that initial price is totally off base. Actively looking for contradictory information helps break the hold of that anchor.
a mental tug of war. We've got to arm ourselves, especially when the stakes are high. But it's not just about numbers, right? Kahneman also talks about how our brains love a good story, even if it's not entirely accurate.
The illusion of understanding, he calls it. We crave that single, clear cause for an event, even when it's more complex than that.
Give us an example. Paint us a picture.
Picture this. It's 2003. News breaks about Saddam Hussein's capture. Bond prices, they go up. Pundits, they jump in and say it's because investors are after safer assets now that Hussein's caught.
Less uncertainty, things are looking up, right?
You'd think so. But wait, just a half hour later, those bond prices, they drop. Headlines scramble to explain it, saying it's because now, with Hussein gone, those riskier assets are more appealing.
Wait, so the same event caused both a rise and a fall in prices? Sounds like they were just trying to make the news fit whatever story they wanted to tell.
Exactly. Our brain's trying to impose order on randomness, creating a narrative, even if it means ignoring contradictory evidence.
And that tendency to oversimplify, latch onto one explanation, that's not just harmless storytelling, is it?
Especially in finance, politics, even everyday choices, this illusion of understanding, it can lead us down the wrong path.
So be wary of anyone claiming to have all the answers.
Kahneman's not saying be skeptical of everything, but be aware, be cautious, especially when someone's selling you a story that's too neat and tidy. The world's messy.
Love that. Question those seemingly obvious narratives, because often the truth is far more interesting, far more complex. And speaking of things that seem more complex than they are, let's talk about regression to the mean.
It's a mouthful, but actually quite straightforward. Kahneman uses golfers super relatable. Imagine you're watching a tournament, and this player has an amazing first day, way above their usual performance.
Day 2 rolls around, I'm expecting another great day. Maybe not AS amazing, but still good.
That's natural to think. And we do it in other areas too, attributing success to skill, failure to lack of effort, all that. But statistically, it's more likely that golfers' performance will be closer to their average on day two. Not because they choked, but because things tend to even out.
So extremes, good or bad, they're often followed by something closer to average. Just probability doing its thing.
Exactly. The danger is misinterpreting it. We praise the CEO for a stellar year, blame them for a downturn,
Mm.
but are we giving them too much credit, too much blame, when it could just be things balancing out?
Something to keep in mind, not just in business, but personally too. That amazing lucky streak. Enjoy it, but don't beat yourself up when things inevitably become a bit more normal.
Normal.
Exactly. And on the flip side, a run of bad luck. Statistically, a shift toward the average is more likely than not.
It cuts both ways.
Okay, love that. But what about those areas where experience does matter? We'd hope expertise translates to accuracy, right?
That's where Kahneman throws us for a loop, tackling this illusion of skill. He dives into the research of Paul Meehl, a psychologist who compared expert judgment to simple algorithms in various fields. And the results were surprising.
I bet they were. Let me guess. The algorithms won.
In over half the studies, a simple formula, just crunching numbers, was more accurate than experienced professionals.
That's wild, especially in areas where we value experience so much. What's Kahneman's take on that?
He actually has this great anecdote. Back when he was in the Israeli army, he had to create a new interview process for officer candidates. High stakes, trying to identify future leaders. He starts with this elaborate system, then has this realization, scraps it all, and decides to just use a simple formula.
Bold move. How'd that go?
The Formula One, more accurate than his team of highly trained interviewers.
Okay, so should we all just surrender to the algorithms?
Not quite. Kahneman's not advocating for robot overlords yet, but he says highlighting the limits of even expert intuition.
So when can we trust our gut, and when do we need to, as they say, show our work?
Kahneman says intuition's powerful, but only in environments with stable regularities. Think of a chess master. They see the board, and boom, they've got these intuitive judgments that seem almost magical. And on that chessboard, with its rules and patterns, their intuition's often spot on.
But take that same chess master, ask them to predict the stock market.
Whole different ballgame. The stock market, with all its variables and unpredictability, that's not where intuition shines. And yet we see this illusion of skill all the time in finance. Experts claiming insights that defy the odds.
So trust your gut when it's been trained in a structured environment, consistent feedback. Otherwise,
Be wary of anyone with a crystal ball, especially when it comes to something as unpredictable as the markets.
love it. It's a reminder to stay humble, even or maybe especially when we consider ourselves experts. Okay, we've covered a lot. Anchors, narratives, the limits of expertise. What other mental rabbit holes does Kahneman take us down?
Well, buckle up, because next up is this mind-bending concept. The difference between our remembering self and our experiencing self. Think of them like two different ways we process and recall experiences. The experiencing self, that's all about the here and now, what we're feeling, sensing, going through in the moment.
So right now, as we're chatting, my experiencing self is trying to soak up all this knowledge, maybe wishing I'd gone for a bigger coffee.
Exactly. But then we've got our remembering self, and that one kicks in after the fact. It's the storyteller, shaping those past experiences into the narrative of our lives. And here's the thing, they don't always agree.
Okay, now you have to elaborate on that. What's this discrepancy all about? How can we experience one thing but remember it differently?
Kahneman, he describes this study where people went through two painful procedures, right? One was quick but intense. The other, longer, but the pain eased up towards the end. Logically, you'd avoid the short, sharp pain next time, right?
Less pain overall, that's the goal.
You'd think so. But get this, when asked which they'd repeat, most people chose the longer one.
Hold on, they picked more total pain. That doesn't compute. Why would they do that?
Because our remembering self, it plays by what Kahneman calls the peak end rule. It's not recording the whole experience like a video. It's fixated on that peak moment, most pleasurable, most painful, whatever, and how things ended. So even though the longer one meant more pain overall, that easier ending, it made for a better memory.
So we're choosing to repeat things based on how our brains prefer to remember them, even if that memory's not the full story. That's both wild and kind of unsettling.
It shows just how much our choices aren't always as rational as we like to think. We're constantly creating narratives about our lives and those narratives, heavily influenced by whatever story our remembering self chooses to tell.
So how do we use this? Are we doomed to just keep repeating painful stuff because of our brain's wiring?
Not doomed, no, but it does make being present, especially during the good times, even more important, don't just let those moments go by. Savor them, because those are the ones your remembering self is going to latch onto later.
It's not the destination or the journey, it's being really there for both. I like that.
Mm.
But while we're on the topic of how our memories can be kind of manipulated, let's talk framing. We all have our own perspective, sure, but can simply changing how we present info lead to wildly different choices, even if the facts are the same?
Absolutely can. And Kahneman lays out this striking example, the Asian disease problem. Imagine there is this outbreak. Two options to fight it. Option A, it guarantees you save 200 people. Option B, 33% chance of saving everyone, 67% chance no one's saved. What do you go with?
Tough one. I think I'd go with A. A sure thing's got to be better than a gamble when lives are on the line.
Most people do when it's framed as life safety. But here's the twist. What if I said option C means 400 deaths, while D's got that same 33% chance of NO deaths and a 67% chance of 600 deaths?
But that's the same information. A and C are the same, B and D too. You just change the words around.
Exactly. But now with potential losses, most people go for D, the riskier gamble, even though it's statistically the same as B.
Our brains are that easily swayed. A few different words make us more or less okay with risk, even when the odds haven't changed at all.
Our brains really hate loss. We're wired to feel it way more strongly than an equal gain. This loss aversion makes us take risks to avoid a loss, even if it could mean losing even more.
So we play it safe, stick with what we know, even if there could be a bigger reward out there.
Happens all the time. And that leads to prospect theory's second big insight. How we frame outcomes really gets us, like with the Asian disease thing.
Right, just the wording, gains or losses, totally flip people's risk tolerance. Even with the same odds, we're so susceptible to how things are presented.
Exactly. So slowing down, reframing things ourselves, that's key. See something as a gain, flip it, imagine it as a loss, and vice versa.
Don't just take things at face value. Play devil's advocate with yourself before deciding, especially when it's a big decision.
Exactly that. Engage system 2. Question those gut reactions. And this isn't just about money or stats. Even our sense of what's right or wrong, Kahneman says, that can be swayed by framing too.
Wait, our morals are as fickle as our taste for risk? Now that's kind of a scary thought.
It can seem that way. He uses taxes as an example. Imagine two situations. First, a family's taxed on all their wealth. Richer folks pay a bigger percentage. Second, families are taxed on what's left after necessities. So those with more disposable income pay more.
Both times, the wealthier are paying more, but the reasoning is different.
Exactly. And how we judge those two situations morally, it shifts depending on how it's framed. Taxing total wealth, we might be outraged, thinking it's unfair to those who earned it. But when it's about what's left after everyone's needs are met, suddenly it seems fairer, even though the outcome's basically the same.
So in a world where even our sense of right and wrong is this malleable, what do we do with that? It's like Kahneman showing us just how easily we can be misled, even about big stuff.
He's not trying to make us distrust everything, but to wake us up to these potential biases. Question our assumptions, be aware of framing's power, and really look at the heart of the matter, not just our gut reaction to how it's presented.
Like a mental self-defense course against manipulation. I love it. Okay, I'm ready to learn those moves. What other mental jujitsu does Kahneman have for us?
Well, he ends with a concept that'll really get you thinking, that these cognitive biases, as often as they trip us up, they can also be tools to influence behavior, hopefully for the better. He calls them nudges.
Nudges. Now that rings a bell. I've heard that somewhere before. Nudges.
Right.
It's that subtle influence thing, isn't it? Like when the cafeteria puts the fruit bowl right at eye level so you're more likely to make a healthy choice.
Exactly. It's all about working with those predictable patterns in our thinking to guide people towards better choices without taking away their freedom to choose.
So it's not all doom and gloom. We're not just puppets to these biases. They can be used for good, too. Hit me with another nudge example.
One of the most famous ones is organ donation. Lots of countries, you got to opt in to be a donor. But just changing that default to opt out today so you're in, unless you say no donation rates go way up.
That's incredible. Same choice, really to give or not, but just how it's presented makes all the difference. Makes you wonder about the ethics of it all, though. Where's the line between helpful guidance and, manipulation?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Mm.
The ethics of nudging are definitely something to be super mindful of.
Yeah.
Who gets to decide what's beneficial and when? Those are some big, thought-provoking questions Kahneman leaves us with.
It's like he's given us this amazing toolkit for understanding human behavior, but also a warning label.
Handle with care.
For sure. So as we wrap up this deep dive into thinking fast and slow, what's the one big takeaway you hope our listeners walk away with?
Kahneman's not saying we can achieve perfect rationality. It'd be unrealistic.
Yeah.
It's more about understanding that our thinking eye is inherently flawed. We all have blind spots.
We're human, after all.
Exactly. And once we accept that, once we see those glitches in our mental software, that's when we can start to counter them, make choices that are more deliberate, more informed.
It's a constant process, this self-improvement thing. Like, we wouldn't expect a computer to run perfectly without updates and bug fixes, right? Our brains aren't that different.
Perfectly put. Embrace those imperfections,
Yeah.
but don't be afraid to question your assumptions, challenge your own thinking. That's often where the real growth happens.
Love that. Big thanks to you, dear listeners, for joining us on this incredible journey through thinking fast and slow. And of course, a huge thank you to our expert for guiding us through the twists and turns of our own minds. Until next time, stay curious, stay questioning, and keep on thinking.